This video is sponsored by Blinkist. Use the link in the description and you'll receive 1 free week and 25% off an annual premium membership. Molly was born completely blind. She has never seen a color, a shape, an object, anything. She navigates and understands the world primarily through touch and sound. In order to distinguish the objects she encounters, she runs her hands across their surfaces. Molly is also very superstitious. For good luck, she always carries with her her lucky marble and lucky die. Depending on the situation, she often takes one of them out and rubs it in her hand. She can distinguish between the die and the marble by feeling and discerning the die's angular edges and pointed corners versus the marble's round, smooth surface. At 18 years old, Molly undergoes cataract removal surgery and an intraocular lens implant. Her blindness is effectively cured. Molly awakes from the surgery, and for the first time in her life, she sees the world around her, all the colors and shapes and objects previously known to her only by touch and language. On the table next to the hospital bed are her lucky marble and lucky die. In this moment, she wants to hold her lucky marble. She looks at both items on the table. Before touching them, can she tell which is which? Can she tell the marble from the die, having only touched them but never seen them? This question is what is known as Molyneux's problem, originally formulated by philosopher William Molyneux in 1688. Intuitively, it might seem obvious to assume that Molly will be able to connect the smoothness she's touched in the past to the rounded appearance of the spherical marble, and the pointedness she's felt to the angular appearance of the cubic die. But without any prior visual experience, without any reference points for what smoothness or pointedness or anything looks like, how would she be able to make these connections? For hundreds of years, versions of this thought experiment have divided philosophers. Empiricists, believing someone in this situation would not be able to identify the objects because knowledge comes only or primarily from first-hand sense experiences, which in this case have not yet been had. Rationalists believe that the person would be able to identify the objects because knowledge chiefly comes from our ability to reason, and the connections will be able to be deduced through one's rational faculties. Nowadays, though, modern science allows for the possibility of this thought experiment to not just be debated over, but actually tested. In 2011, MIT professors Richard Held and Dr. Pawan Singha conducted an experiment in which a group of children and teenagers who were born blind received cataract removal surgery, curing their blindness. Just following their surgery, the participants were then presented with Lego-like blocks. One collection of blocks was placed visibly on a table, and another identical collection was placed hidden from view under the table, only perceivable by touch. When the participants were asked to match objects they had felt with objects seen, the results were essentially equivalent to chance, with 58% accuracy. In other words, Molly would not dependably be able to identify the marble or the die. The experiment concluded that the empiricists were right. The primary tool we have to get the outside world inside our head into knowledge and understanding is our senses, not our reason. This study is not without critiques though, and some argue that since there is variability and other factors involved with things like the surgery's recovery process, as well as the duration of time participants were tested after it, the problem is still somewhat inconclusive. However, regardless, Molyneux's problem points to a broader problem, our first unanswerable philosophical question. How do we know that what we are perceiving is accurate? If we come to understand the world not primarily through reason, but through our sense experiences, how accurate are our perceptions and understandings if our senses are limited and often unreliable? Most of us assume that what we are encountering outside of our head is relatively consistent with how it seems inside, but how do we know, and can we ever know for sure? The term qualia refers to the internal, subjective, qualitative properties of experiences. This includes things like color, taste, and feelings, pain, love, sharpness, smoothness, and so on. And so, whether or not what we are perceiving is accurate to the world in and of itself depends largely on whether or not qualia, or our subjective experiences, are intrinsic properties of the world, or merely a product of the mind, or some combination. Even if we can use tools to measure, test, and enhance our insights about the physical world, the last stop for everything is still the mind. We are always left with and limited by the cognitive and perceptual frameworks inbuilt in the mind. Since we can never experience anything outside of the mind, including the mind itself, we can never know what anything is actually like outside of it. This is often referred to as the egocentric predicament. This leads us to the next seemingly unanswerable philosophical question. How do we know that what we are perceiving is the same as other people? Of course, since we can never experience anything outside of our mind, we can also never enter into another person's to know what things are like for them. Not only can we not know if the experience of blue is entirely unique to the human mind, but we also can't know if the specific blue we personally experience is unique to our mind alone, or at least is different from what is experienced in some portion of other minds. Since we can communicate relatively successfully about events and objects in the world, we can know that differences amongst objects and events outside our mind are generally proportionally consistent with differences experienced inside our mind. But just because we refer to the differences with the same terms does not mean that the differences are experienced as the same thing. Perhaps what you see as green looks like blue in your friend's mind and vice versa, but you just associate the same words with the same differences. Because all qualia are housed in the conscious private mind, we can never objectively perceive, measure, or define them without using tools or terminology that don't also fall victim to the same problem. This leads us to the next unanswerable question. How do we know that anything or anyone exists outside our mind at all? If you can never get out of your mind and experience anything outside of it, and you can never enter the mind of anyone else, how can you know for sure that anything or anyone exists outside of your mind? We reasonably assume that since the world interfaces back with us, objects and people respond to our actions, people talk and act like they feel and think things, and so on, that all of these things are real, independent things outside of our mind. But how can you know for sure that those people and things aren't merely creations of your mind? You do this every night when you dream, without question. Can you prove right now that you are not on some sort of spaceship, hurtling through the cosmos, a member of an advanced species that has sent itself off on a long journey to avoid a catastrophe happening on its host planet? The only way to make the duration of the journey endurable was to be placed in a stasis tube with wires plugged into your brain, temporarily clearing all memories and actively stimulating your brain's nerve impulses throughout the trip in order to create a lifetime worth of experiences until arriving somewhere else and remembering it was all a simulated reality. Of course, odds are arguably very unlikely that this or anything similar is the case, but the point is, the odds are not zero, and you simply cannot know for sure. Although you can never know for sure about anything that exists outside your mind, the one thing you can know for sure is that you exist somewhere in something. As philosopher René Descartes pointed out, if you can think and doubt, you must exist. But then, where did you come from? Even if what you perceive isn't real, there still seemingly needs to be something other than yourself that created you and simulates, causes, or implants what you perceive. If you, in some form, exist, you must either be the creator of yourself or something else must have created you. If we assume the more likely and normal belief that other things and other people do exist and you are created by other people, then those who created you must have also been created by something or someone else. And whoever created them, again, must have been created by someone or something else, so on and so forth, all the way back ad infinitum to the beginning of humanity, the beginning of life, the beginning of Earth, and the beginning of everything. And so, no matter the case, where did it all come from? If something or someone created everything, who created it or them? If everything came from nothing, how could it have come to be at all? This brings us to our final unanswered and possibly unanswerable philosophical question. Does God exist? Of course, God means different things to different people, but in terms of what is traditionally considered God, defined in all three of the Abrahamic religious texts, the Bible, the Torah, and the Quran, there are quite a few problems. In these religions, God is defined as omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent. This means that God is all-knowing, aware of everything that has happened, is happening, and will happen, all-powerful, possessing unlimited power and able to do anything, and all good, possessing maximal morality. The problem is that there are a multitude of paradoxes that arise from these qualities. For example, the classic omnipotence paradox, the paradox of the stone, which shows that if God is omnipotent, he must be able to create a stone so large and heavy that even he can't lift it. If he can't create this stone, how can he be omnipotent? But if he cannot lift it, how can he be omnipotent? Similarly, if God knows everything that will happen, then he knows every choice, intervention, and action he will ever make. Thus, he can never change his mind. If he does change his mind, and he's omniscient, he must have known that he was going to change his mind beforehand, and therefore, he wouldn't be changing his mind. If he didn't know he was going to change his mind, he must not be omniscient. If he can't change his mind, he must not be omnipotent. Lastly, there is what is known as the problem of evil, which is defined as follows. If God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good, why does evil and tragedy and suffering pervade the world? If God is omnipotent, he must be able to prevent evil and suffering. If he is also omniscient, he must be able to know and foresee it. And so, he either wants to prevent evil, but he is not able to do so or is not aware of it, or he is aware of it and can do so, but does not want to prevent it. In the former, he is not all-powerful or not all-knowing, or both. In the latter, he is not all-good. If one argues that God provides the individual with free will so as to allow the individual to choose to follow him or not, would not God's plan and awareness already include the individual choosing or not choosing to follow him? For what reason would God cause and allow individuals to not choose to follow him or be morally good if it meant that they would cause evil and suffering? If these instances are, rather, some sort of test, why would an all-knowing, all-powerful God need to make people undergo tests involving horrible evil and suffering if he can create a flourishing world without the need for tests involving horrible evil and suffering? He must work in mysterious, sadistic ways. Of course, it could be possible that God is maximally great but not all-powerful, or he is not omniscient and is not aware of what's going on, or he isn't all-good, but rather, he is morally fallible. And of course, God, or the creator of everything, or perhaps more accurately, the underlying nature of everything, could be something entirely different, completely beyond our ability to imagine, let alone define. But the point is, the God we have traditionally defined has its problems, and the God we haven't, we don't know of. In truth, we cannot yet disprove the existence of any God any more than we can prove the one many claim to know. Currently, the only honest answer is we don't know. Ultimately, we can't get out of our minds to know what the universe is really like in and of itself. We can't enter into other minds to know what it is like for anyone else. We can't know if outside our mind there is anything at all, or if it is real in the way we think, and we cannot dig within our mind to know where it originally came from. But perhaps the problem is merely our conception of our mind, or more accurately, our conception of ourself. We often view ourselves as a distinct and separate thing, perceiving other things. We see ourselves as being in the mind, and our mind as being in our body. But the body is inescapably in the world, and we are no less dependent on the world than we are the body. All of these things are simultaneously interlocked and interdependent. Thus, perhaps in this way, there is really no outside of you. You are merely a fully embedded, non-separate part, inescapably attached to the body of the universe. If we view ourselves in this way, there is no accurate or inaccurate perception, no dichotomy between the world as it is and the world as you experience it, no beginning, no end, no outside, no inside, no separate, no other. There is just a single unified whole of everything, everything equally true, everything equally proportional, eternally dancing the dance of everything to the tune of nothing. To doubt the existence of anything outside of you is perhaps entirely reasonable, because in this sense, you are everything else, and everything else is you. This video was sponsored by Blinkist. Our sense of self can be disorienting. It is partly our anchor to reality and partly our vessel of alienation from everything. The books Being You by Aniel Seth, The Biological Mind by Alan Jasanoff, and The Man Who Wasn't There by Anil Anathaswamy provide highly unique and engaging insights into modern understandings of this topic, exploring the brain, the mind, and the self, and asking what it means to be you in the world and how you came to be a you in the world. Using the app Blinkist, you can learn from all of these books and more in just around 15 minutes each. By condensing over 5,500 of the best nonfiction books and podcasts across 27 different categories into thoughtfully organized and eloquently written 15-minute text and audio explainers that can be accessed even while offline, Blinkist allows you to discover new perspectives, learn about thought-provoking ideas, and derive useful information about just about any subject, whenever and wherever you are. If you enjoy sharing your interests and discoveries with a friend or partner, Blinkist's feature, Blinkist Connect, also allows premium users to share their account with another person for the same price, essentially providing 2 memberships for the price of 1. Connected accounts can easily share their favorite blinks and shortcasts with each other, while also being able to control which titles are kept private. If you're interested in further developing, enhancing, and supplementing your reading habit, use the link in the description and you'll receive 1 free week of unlimited access to Blinkist, as well as 25% off an annual premium membership. The free 7-day trial can be canceled at any time within the trial period. And of course, as always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy considering and trying to answer difficult philosophical questions, consider checking out my guided writing journal, which I've filled with these kinds of questions. You can also find the link to it in the description below.